Welcome to Tacoma Calvary. I'm Pastor B, and this is today's Walk in the Light. The question for the day is this: do you trust that God is in control? No matter the circumstances, or do your circumstances dictate your faith? And then ultimately, do your circumstances define you? I love the quote of Charles Swindoll when he said, "Anything under God's control is never out of control." He said anything under God's control is never out of control. And I might add this, although it may feel like it. And I think about the book of Jonah, where this prophet of the Lord was given a word by God to go to Nineveh, that great city, and to cry out against it. And it says that Jonah went and he got on a boat, and what did he do? He was the prophet in the Bible that heard what the Lord said and didn't do what God told him to do. In fact, he got on a boat, he paid his fare, and he went to Tarshish in the opposite direction. And as he got on that boat and he went down into the bottom of the boat, it says in Jonah chapter 1, verse number 4, "But the Lord sent out a great wind on the sea." It's so amazing how the Lord at times will get our attention and how he'll use anything he has to use to get our attention. And so it says, "But the Lord sent out a great wind on the sea." It was the Lord that sent the wind on the sea. And so again, do you trust that God's in all control? Do you trust that he's a sovereign God? Because in this particular case, it says, "And there was a mighty tempest on the sea." In fact, the word tempest in the Hebrew, it means Sahara. It means a storm or a whirlwind. It's most likely where we get the word Sahara, as in the Sahara Desert, the stormy or the whirlwind type of a desert. And so it was the Lord that sent this great wind as Jonah had gone down into this boat and he was running from the presence of the Lord, that the Lord himself sent this great wind, sent this mighty tempest on the sea. And then the Bible says at the end of verse number 4, so that the ship was about to be broken up. Isn't it amazing that God is in absolute and total control? That he knew exactly what that boat could take. And so he sends out this mighty and this great tempest, so much so that the boat itself was almost to be broken up. And then it goes on in verse number 5, right at the beginning, and it says, "Then the mariners were afraid." Now, if you've ever seen the show The Deadliest Catch, you see these guys who are out in these storms in some of the craziest weather as they're crab fishing. In fact, it's a profession that has the highest fatality rate in all of America. It's like 127 deaths per 100,000 out there on the sea. It is a deadly, deadly job. But these men are used to those kind of waves, to those kind of seas. It's not new to them, but for these mariners, this tempest that was on this boat, they were afraid. These men were exceedingly afraid, in fact, it says in the Bible. And in that particular context, they asked Jonah why he had done the things that he had done. In fact, he had shared with them that the storms were because of him. They're now recognizing that this thing is a supernatural event that's taking place. And they ask him, well, what should we do? How should we end this? And he said to them, you need to throw me overboard. Well, they didn't have the heart to throw Jonah overboard. In fact, it says in verse number 13 of Jonah chapter 1, it says, "Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to return to land, but they could not." Why? Because the sea itself grew even more tempestuous against them. You see, God was the one that sent this storm out. God was the one that sent this mighty, tempestuous storm that was about to break up the boat. And yet, it hadn't gotten Jonah's attention. And so what did God do? Well, he turned up the temperature even a little bit more. It grew even a little bit more tempestuous. Obviously not enough to break up the boat. God knew exactly what this boat could take. And God knows exactly what you and I can take. Well, in verse number 15, they did in fact finally take Jonah. And it says in the Bible, so they picked up Jonah and they threw him into the sea. And guess what happened? Immediately the sea ceased from its raging. These men recognized that this was a supernatural event. Jonah knew that this was the Lord. Do you know that some of the storms in your life are because of the Lord? Because in verse 16 it says, Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and they took vows. Listen, they weren't doing those things when they got on the boat. They were doing those things because of the storms that had taken place. And so through this tempestuous storm, the Lord was doing a mighty work. The Lord used this mighty storm to do a mighty work in Jonah. He did a mighty work in the hearts of the mariners, and God did a mighty work in the nation of Nineveh, that place and that great city that God called Jonah to go and cry out against. Don't think that God can't, and do not think that God will not bring a storm in your life. But you got to know that it's a test, and that God works it together for good, and not only for you, but for those who are around you. Don't let your circumstances dictate your faith. You've just got to trust that God is in all control. God bless you guys today. You can find us at TacomaCalvary.com. You can see us at Tacoma Calvary Chapel on Facebook, and we look forward to seeing you again. God bless you.